So here we have the basic Matlab interface that you'll see as soon as you kickstart Matlab. I'll kind of move this around a little bit, but the most important part perhaps when you first start Matlab is to click on this little bit here. It says if you're new to Matlab to watch this video and demos. The demo videos for Matlab are very good, and I've also got burned to post up a couple of web links to the official demos, and it's the ones that I showed in class this week. So check those out, but then also go into Matlab and see what the other demos are, because the basic ones are very useful, I think, when you're first starting out. But what we've got here, if I can give you a little tour, is the command window, which we can write, create variables, do whatever we want in there. Here we've got our current folder where we've got all of our M files and programs that we've created through Matlab. Over here we have our workspace, which will give us all the variables that we create will be shown in here, and you can click on those and have a look at them, etc., etc. But what we're going to do, and what we did in class this week, was click on this little button here, which is it says New M File. When you click on that, it basically brings up something that looks like a word processor, and we're just going to create code in this word processor then. So click on that and create a new M file, and it will look a little bit like this. Now this is obviously Microsoft Word, because I don't have Matlab on my little computer here, but for the sake of showing you what it looks like, it just looks like Microsoft Word basically. So, whoops. So let's have a look and see what the code that I'd written in this M file was. So straight away I'd written something called clear all, which is a useful thing to write at the beginning of any M file, because what happens is that any variables that were created prior get eliminated, and which was something perhaps you'd want to do, because if we're creating variables like we have here, prices, if we'd already created a variable prices somewhere else, it might get a bit confused and try to input those prices on top of the other ones. So it's often good to just write clear all at the beginning of your M file if you want it as a standalone file. Then I put all the prices, and I just nick that straight off the Blackboard tutorial slide, so you can just copy and paste that. The way Matlab works is that we put these square brackets around any arrays that we want to create, and this is an array of prices with these three dots, which are ellipses, an ellipsis on each line to kind of tell it to go on to the next line with this particular array. Because what Matlab does is it reads it line by line. It'll read this line by line, so that if you don't put that ellipsis there, it'll try to read some kind of function 11.24, which is not a function at all. So it'll have a problem with that unless you put those three dots at the end of those lines, which is quite useful. You don't want to have this huge long horizontal line full of data. Alright, next step, create gross and net returns. So this is a bit interesting. I'm using a for loop. But perhaps even before that, you should notice that I've put a percentage sign here for the create, gross, and net returns. What that percent sign does is tells Matlab it's a comment. So it won't run anything on that line. Everything after a percent sign will just be commented away. Which, again, very useful to use when you're in the workplace and you're collaborating on code. You want to make sure the people you're collaborating with know exactly what's happening in each part of your code. And especially when you come back to your code in a couple of days and you're like, oh, I can't remember what that section was for. So using comments is very, very useful. Let's try to explain what I've done here. I'm using a for loop, which means that k starts at 2 and goes to 25, and this section of code is run each time for each value of k. So if k is 2, it'll run through using k equals 2, and the first line of this code here says gross month returns, and in brackets it'll be 2 for the first time this runs through. And what that does is it creates a variable, gross month return, and the second element of that is going to be prices, second element of prices, divided by the first element of prices. So it's the gross monthly return as we defined it in Excel. So the net month return, therefore, is going to be the gross month return minus 1. And then we have to put an end to our for loop so it knows when to finish that loop. So that loop is going to run 24 times from where k equals 2 to 25. Simple. Well, not quite simple, but it's an interesting little construction we have to use in Matlab. So no surprises, we can do the same thing for 6-month gross and net returns, and I'm labeling them 6-month gross and 6-month net. Again, prices divided by the price, which is 6 periods before, etc. Just like what we did in Excel, but this is a Matlab format of this. And the net is obviously the gross minus 1. Now, when we plot the net returns on separate graphs, we're going to use the plot function. So we can start by writing figure 1 to say, let's create a new figure, which we'll call 1. Plotting net month return from 2 to the end. We obviously know that there's going to be a 0 in that first element of net month return. So if we're going to plot from 2 to the end, that'll eliminate that 0, which is quite useful. Similarly, we can plot on a separate figure 6-month net from the seventh observation to the end, because there'll be 6 zeros at the beginning of this vector. Finally, what we did was we plotted them on the same graph, which is quite useful. The way Matlab deals with this plot function, and if you're in Matlab and write plot and open a bracket, it'll tell you what arguments it requires. But the way it deals with it is the first variable you put in there will be the x variable, and the next variable you put in there will be the y variable. So if we wanted to do like an overlapping time series with net month return and 6-month net on top of each other, we'd actually need to construct a single matrix first with each of those time series as a separate column. So what we've done is I've constructed something called x, and it can be called whatever you want, but I'm calling it x. From 2 to 25 in column 1, so column 1 of this vector, so that's how we do it in Matlab. The first part is the rows, so rows 2 to 25 in column 1 will be the net month returns, and rows 7 to 25 in column 2 is the 6-month net returns. So when we plot x, it's actually it's a matrix with 2 columns in it, so 2 columns worth of data. The first is the net month return, the second is the 6-month net, and when we plot x, it'll plot each of those columns as separate lines. So have a go at putting that code into Matlab and see if you can get that neat little plot. Be very careful about the way you write your variables. Capitalization matters, as does spelling, of course. So if your spelling's for prices, if you've written price here and you've got prices over down here, then it won't work. There'll be a problem, and you'll have to go back and try to debug your code. So that's all we got up to in our first tutorial. So hopefully that puts you back up to speed, and we can get on to tutorial 2 next week.